It's time to take a ride on the Steelers Afternoon Drive with our co-hosts, Alan Saunders and Zachary Smith.
Welcome into another episode of Steelers Afternoon Drive. I'm Zachary Smith. That is Alan Saunders. Alan, how are we doing today? Feel good Friday.
Feeling good. Feeling very good. Got a flight to Florida tomorrow, so that never hurts the Friday either, right? I mean, and then we got the schedule from the Steelers, and I don't have anything until 2 p.m. on Sunday. So that's okay. I'm feeling even better about that. So have a nice long.
Is that Orlando?
Yeah, it's in Orlando. Okay. That's where the league meeting is this year. It moves around, but it's always somewhere warm. It was in Arizona last year. It's also been in Palm Springs. So it kind of moves around, but generally someplace nice and sunshiny. And so that'll be enjoyable.
I was to say, is that a requirement? Is that how they're like, okay, this is one of the boxes
the NFL owners are 70 to 80-year-old, mostly white billionaires. Where do you think they want to spend their time? That we're not going to, Sheboygan or,
they're picking from the same list as people that retire.
Yes, right, exactly. All their friends are retired. They just happen to be, still making millions of dollars a year owning an NFL team. But yeah, so it's always it's this year it's the Ritz-Carlton. It's always somewhere, some very fancy hotel in some warm locale. And yeah, I'm not complaining necessarily. I'm staying by SeaWorld in Orlando, which was not my choice. It was just where was available. So I don't know if I'm gonna check out a dolphin show or what. I'm just gonna probably go to the hotel bar Saturday.
There we go. So different setting for you next week. So if you're gonna be tuning into the afternoon drive, you'll see Alan in a different place. Alan, I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's boring. No one really gives a crap, at least right now, until you see it play out in real time. But there's some NFL rule changes that we should probably bring up and briefly discuss just to give people an idea of the changes that they can expect to see. The hip drop tackle has been a big one. Tush push is staying, and of course the kickoff stuff. Don't know where you want to start with it, if you just want to briefly go over them, but I think the hip drop is probably the biggest one here to discuss.
This hip drop tackle rule, and again, all these are proposals that have to be voted on by the ownership. I think the hip drop tackle is a boondoggle. I understand the NFL's reasoning that they've identified this play that it causes a lot of injuries, and if you don't know what a hip drop tackle is, you kind of think about it where a defender is grabbing the ball carrier around his waist, and then they sort of jump forward or swing their feet forward to let their body weight do the tackling for them. And it results in, usually what happens is the ball carrier's legs get pinned under the tackler. It causes a lot of high ankle sprains. It has caused some broken ankles, some broken legs. Tony Pollard last year had a broken bone because of one. Believe Pat Freiermuth was injured on one of those for the Steelers last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Was it the Texans game, I believe?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And so there's certainly a dangerous play, and I don't think there's any really argument about that. I just think the question becomes, how do you go about eliminating a dangerous play in a way that makes the football still watchable? This is apparently they're going to try to make this some kind of standard that involves a 15-yard penalty and a personal foul. I think that's a horrifically bad idea. I can't possibly see this going well. It is so hard to officiate even clear, the standard for horse collar tackle or for face mask is insanely clear, right? You can't touch this part of their body with your hand. It doesn't get more black and white than that. And how many times a year do we see the NFL officials screw up horse collar tackles and face masks? It happens all the time. Yeah. Now you have something way subjective, just completely subjective. And the quote from Troy Vincent from the NFL comes out and says, "Oh, our officials believe they can officiate this." I call BS. They can't officiate the rules they have now. They stink. They're no good at their jobs, and they're not going to get better. Why don't you pay for full-time officials, and then maybe
that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. I think this is going to go terribly if they enact it. I think if you want to get that out of the game, you set it up where you say, okay, we're going to have a 2-year pilot program. The referees are going to call it on the field, but it's not going to be a flag. They're just going to say, hey, we saw this, and it's going to be a $5,000 fine for every player that does it. And then after the 2 years, we'll look at how many actually got called. We review the video. We'll see how many called versus how many wanted to be called. We'll give the fine money to charity, and we'll see where we are, and we'll see if this is actually a good idea or not. Just rolling with this, that's never been tried at another level. Like, this is why the UFL exists. Like, why aren't they doing that in the UFL? The NFL should be paying them. Here's $50,000. Make this a rule for this spring so we can watch it unfold. No, we're just going to experiment with the world's premier sporting entertainment property and see if we don't screw it up. Like, I hate everything about the process, not necessarily the idea of trying to get this tackle out of the game.
I mean, when you lay it out like that, absolutely. But so that is, like I said, I think if it does pass, the one that we would certainly have the largest issue with.
I mean,
but the other things that
I don't see any reason not to. I will say that, among other things, there are several things that I've noticed about, like, every time you see a play becomes popular, you look and it's like, oh, well, that's not technically within the rules. Like, you got the pushers moving forward at the snap a lot. You got the center moving the ball a lot. Like, there's a lot going on with that play that is not strictly within the rules. The other one I'm really interested to see as it gets talked about this offseason is the sort of Tyreek Hill motion that we've seen a lot. Right. Like, he's moving forward at the snap every time. I talked to a coach from Miami at the combine. I was like, how long do you think you guys are going to get away with this? Like, he just kind of smiled at me. Like, I don't know. I guess we'll find out. So all the time when there's these like popular plays that they want to do something about, I think there's often a solution within the rules. The other one of those is like, look, the tush push is going to be popular until some quarterback breaks their arm doing it, and then like that's going to be the end of it. Like, and I'm not suggesting that defensive players should be trying to break quarterbacks' arms. It is just a thing that happens when you go into the bottom of the pile that many times over the course of a season. And so I think the deterrent there already exists. They just need to enforce the rule book and wait for what's inevitably going to happen. The kickoff thing, I watched XFL games with that kickoff rule. I'm fine with it, but I don't think I think they're probably not going to do that, but I would be fine with it if they did. I don't think it's a big deal either way.
I agree, and I think most people in the comments will agree with that. However, Alan, you said something yesterday on the show that some people in the comments did not agree with. I was waiting for this because I was like, okay, what are we going to go to now? Mason Rudolph's out of town. Kenny Pickett's out of town. What is Alan going to say next that gets the people in the comments going against him? The anti-Alan Saunders agenda. The Naji Harris pick, first round 2021, was what did it. He said it wasn't a very good draft pick. Obviously, he's had 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He's been productive in his time in Pittsburgh, certainly. But I got to say, Alan, before we give your take to dive deeper into this, I actually agree with you. I don't know if I said that on the show yesterday, but if the people are going to come at you, I feel like it's only fair for me to say that. But it's not about Najee necessarily himself. It's about the position. I just think you could have gotten a more valuable position in that spot. And they also, even if you're going to take a running back in the first round, the Steelers certainly weren't the team that should have done it with the state of their offensive line at the time either. So I think there was just a lot of things working against them for that to be the guy that they selected in the first round that specific year.
Yeah, I think Naji Harris is a good player. I just don't think it was a good pick, right? I mean, he might I don't think he was the right pick for the Steelers then. I didn't think it then. I said it then. I still don't think so. Like, they should have addressed the offensive line before they picked a running back. If they really wanted to fix the running game, that was the better way to do it. And I think, that's what makes that pick not good. It's not that he's not a good player. It's that they weren't able to get the most out of him because they still have not really fixed the offensive line now, going into the 4th year of his career. And now they're going to have to pick up his option. And we still don't really know what Naji Harris is capable of. Oh, and now, by the way, they've had to, or not had to, but they've decided to, smartly, I may add, to put Jaylen Warren and him into a rotation. You're trying to extend his career. It makes sense. They've sort of evolved from the run them until the wheels fall off idea, but that's also the only way there was value in a running back. If you're not going to run them until the wheels fall off, well, then you can just find the Jaylen Warrens of the world wherever you find them. There's lots of teams with that 2 running back tandem that have not invested high draft picks and running backs over the years. And I think that's probably a better way to go about it than what the Steelers did. So I don't think it was a very good pick. I have been generally expecting them to pick up the 5th-year option for him. I'm not sure if there's a reason they're waiting. The deadline is May. It's either the 1st or the 2nd. I can't remember now, but after the draft. And so be very curious when we talk to Omar next week to ask him what's going on with that. If there's maybe they're trying to get a long-term extension done, I could see that being Steelers' preference. I think if I was the Steelers, I would much rather sign Naji Harris to like a 3 or 4 year deal than just pick up that 5th-year option and eat it. But I don't know where his head is. Najee's a pretty he's a pretty prideful guy. He's a pretty thoughtful guy. I would expect him to feel like one of the standard bearers around the league for running backs trying to get paid. And
he was a big part of those Zoom conversations with like running back contracts.
I would be skeptical that he's just going to take some really team-friendly deal just to take it and get things done. I would expect that to be a pretty, I don't want to say contentious because I don't think there's any bad blood there or anything. I just don't think it would be an easy negotiation for the Steelers to say, hey, here's what would really like to pay you. And the players say, oh, that sounds good to me. Like, I don't see that coming in terms of a long-term contract between the Steelers and Najee Harris. I do expect they'll pick up his 5th year, but if I was going to bet on this, not that you can, but if I was going to, I would bet that his 5th year is this last year with the Steelers. I would wager that they are not able to come to an agreement on a long-term deal. The Steelers have a cheaper and, frankly, on a per-snap basis, better option in Jaylen Warren. They have certainly shown the ability to find that guy, as the rest of the NFL has, anywhere. I think they're going to draft a running back this year with the hope that that player becomes the eventual replacement to Naji Harris, and they could partner with Jaylen Warren to continue that 1-2 punch. So, yeah, I mean, I'm at the point where I don't even think saying that was a bad draft pick is like controversial. Like it's just clear with how much I've struggled with the offensive line since then that was the wrong idea at the time.
Yeah, and I think that's people have the trouble of differentiating being a bad player and a bad draft pick or a good player and a good draft pick. Like it's very possible to have a very good player at that particular position, but for it to not be a great draft pick for the team. Not the best utilization of the pick. So
if one of the top, if Dallas Turner falls to the Steelers this year, the top edge rusher in the draft at number 20, top 5 pick, like that's still not going to be a good pick for the Steelers. Like, what are they going to do with them? You can be a good, and I think the running back first round thing, I don't want to say that it's always a bad idea. Like there are certain times and places where picking a running back in the first round makes a lot of sense for a team. Like you look at the Buffalo Bills over the last couple of years, and that's like a team that absolutely should have at some point used a first round pick on a running back before they I guess, eventually sort of found something in Cook. But like there's plenty of guys there are plenty of teams and situations where that pick makes sense. I don't think it was the Steelers then.
Speaking of the Bills, as we are recording this, another one off the board, Alan. Will Clapp has signed with the Bills, so the Steelers won't clap. Will Clapp off the board to the Bills. I mentioned him. Was that just yesterday? Like maybe I should say that the Steelers are going to sign a center. Yeah, we're going to do it over the weekend. The Steelers are going to sign Brian Allen. There it is. So when we talk on Monday, we'll be talking about it.
I mean, there's nobody left. There's nobody left. So,
yeah, I got some smoke for this too, but I put on X. At one point, I said the same thing on here, but like I put it on X's for other people to maybe chime in. I said, at what point do we reach where like bringing back Mason Cole is just the best option? I had everybody responding, no, like not even alternatives that make sense. Literally just saying no, they don't want it to happen. And I'm like, okay, like I get it, but like from a realistic point of view here, that you got to have somebody in place besides just the idea of a draft pick.
Yeah, I think so, but where does it come from? I don't know. Maybe it is Mason Cole. Look, Mason Cole's a good guy in the locker room, good to have
Yeah.
around. I don't think it's.
What do you think it would take for him to come back for too? I mean, like,
well, who left needs a center? I mean, he can play guard too, so I guess there's some versatility there. But man, like there can't be considering every center that was available is gone. There can't be too many more places that need a center, right? I mean, that's sort of the corollary. Yeah. Seattle. I'm still hopeful that Brian Allen can be the guy, but I don't know who else is out there. There was another guy we talked about yesterday.
Nick Gates.
Yeah, Nick Gates. I mean, so there are some options, but man, they're few and far between. It's
right.
and they getting. And we know they wanted to sign one. They brought in Mitch Morse. Like, it's not like they had just decided before free agency, now we're good. We're just going to draft a guy. Like, they wanted to sign one. And they just haven't. I don't know why.
Right. Yeah, it's an interesting process. We had questions come in, Alan, after we had been done recording yesterday, so we can kind of get some of those. However, I had Aiden actually DM me one as opposed to just responding, so very personal here, Aiden. But I appreciate the question. Big fan of the show. Hear Alan talk about guys that project better as slot corners versus outside guys. What traits are you looking for that make someone better suited for the slot and vice versa?
So there's two things that make someone better suited for the slot, and there's one thing that makes someone less suited for the outside, right? So it's like a sum of A and sum of B. If I'm talking about what makes you better suited for a slot, the two things are tackling and short area quickness. Slot receivers almost never get pressed because you want that slot player is going to have some kind of run responsibility if you're that close to the formation, that you don't want him to take himself out of the running game by jamming a receiver. So you're not going to be able to press your slot receiver very often, and often they go in motion where it's impossible to press them. They're not on the line of scrimmage. It's very hard. So you need a player with short area quickness that can adjust to very shifty slot receivers. And with a free release, the guys have the ability to go, and it's not, outside receivers, there's a condensed route tree. There's only so many routes you can run if you're close to the hash mark. If you're close to the sideline, you're not going to run a 5 or 10 yard out because you'll be out of bounds. But inside, the whole route tree is available. They're getting a free release, so you need a player that's quick. You also need a player that can tackle because they do have run game responsibilities, and so. What the Steelers have actually done is over the years kind of split their slot players into like run down slots and pass down slots. So like Mike Hilton was the run down slot. He's a thicker guy, better tackler, better pass rusher. And then Cam Sutton would come in and play that slot on obvious passing downs where you kind of take the running game equation out of it. I mean, a player that could do both would be ideal, but they've kind of split it up because sometimes these things are hard to find. It's hard to find a guy with elite short area quickness and elite tackling. Like that's a tough.
Mike Sandestill.
Yeah, that's for sure the guy. And then there's the other part of the equation is that because slot receivers are generally, and I will say generally because like Juju is a slot receiver and he's huge, but like generally slot receivers are smaller than outside receivers, and because you're not jamming guys, size and physicality become a lot less of a part of the equation. So, for example, if you're looking at a guy like, Nate Wiggins from Clemson, right? He's very light. He's not that tall. He doesn't have very long arms. So if I'm looking at him and I think, oh, he's got great speed. It was the second fastest corner at the combine. He's great coverage instincts, great ball instincts, but he's small. Like, how am I going to have him go up against DK Metcalf? How am I going to have him go up against some of these big physical wide receivers? It's not going to work. So, like, he's a guy that I think would project as a slot, but he doesn't tackle very well. So, I mean, he's kind of that Cam Sutton inside-outside type where he could be a slot, but probably only on passing downs. He certainly could be an outside corner, but you better have a bigger guy to put with him or he's going to get into trouble. And so I think that's what, that's why when really a lot of times you're just sorting by height. I mean, if a guy's under 5'11", he has to be a slot. If he's 5'11" or 6 foot, he's probably going to be a slot. But then he can't just be short and slow. Like, you got to have that short area quickness and or the tackling ability to really fit in that position. So a lot of times it's smaller guys, but it's a lot of times it's quicker guys, and it's guys that are better tacklers that are going to be projecting more to slot. So if you're looking at this year's draft class, Mike Sanders still is like cut out of the mold for slot corners, but there are other guys out there that I think are going to make better slots than outside corners. Guys like Terrion Arnold, Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, Nate Wiggins, like all those guys I think would at least start in the slot, and maybe they can move outside. Max Melton from Rutgers is a slot 100% and could be a pretty good one.
Daquan Hardy.
Yeah, Daquan Hardy is 5'9" or 5'10", something like that. Like, absolutely has to be a slot. And some of the guys that you'll see listed at safety, I think are actually really probably mostly slot corners.
I think both the Georgia guys.
Like
yeah, Javon Bullard and Tyke.
Yeah, I mean, Bullard at least like can play some half field. Like, Tyke Smith never even played half field safety at Georgia. The first time he ever did it was at the Senior Bowl. Like, he is a slot corner, even though he's listed as a safety. Dadrian Taylor Demerson, I think, has a lot of Mike Hilton to his game. I think he could be that same kind of slot corner as well. So, and you see that with the Steelers too, right? Where they're like, Cam Sutton played some free safety and played slot corner. Elijah Riley has played free safety and slot corner. There's a lot of physical overlap between free safeties and slot corners. I think probably at this point more than you see that mold that the Steelers are looking for with their outside guys, Joey Porter Jr., Darius Rush, Corey Trice, guys that are 6'2", 200 pounds. Like, that seems to be their mold for an outside guy.
And I will say, like, something else, of course, you're going to have anomalies. Darius Williams has played more in the outside than the slot recently. He's 5'9". And then I brought up, because of the idea with Corey Trice, like, there was a corner, and I'm not sure what his role has been in Atlanta, but like when the Cincinnati Bengals were on their Super Bowl runs, they had a guy, Trey Flowers, that like was specifically a tight end matchup in the slot. And I was just saying, maybe that has kind of, as you see more and more tight ends get utilized in that way as like big slots, maybe that will start to like shift the type of player that has to be utilized in the slot. But I don't think that we've like fully seen that conversion, if it's going to happen yet, or, what are your thoughts on that?
I think that part of it is the other way, right? I think that part is the like hybrid strong safety linebacker, where instead of putting a cornerback on the field, you're leaving your linebacker out there, but that's why you need a Patrick Queen. Right. I think that's the answer there. If you look at in this draft, a guy like James Williams from Miami is, that sort of tight end eraser, hybrid safety linebacker type that, not very many teams are playing their strong safeties in the box anymore. The Steelers are one of the very few that do. Most of them are just playing like two half-field safeties, like two pretty equal guys with not much difference between them. But if you want a guy who goes down in the box, can play against the run and cover the tight end, that's like a completely different skill set. And I think it's one of the reasons why DeMonte KZ struggled more at strong safety this year than he did when he was filling it. Like, when he was filling in for Minka as a free safety, he was fine, but he didn't have great results when he was the strong safety because he's not that big of a guy for playing down in the box like that. And so I think there's I think what you're seeing is just the defensive positions are like fracturing, right? Where like you used to just have corners and safeties, and now you have boundary corners, and you have like a rundown slot, which is like almost sort of like a safety in a lot of ways, like a Mike Hilton. You may have like a pass down slot who's just a smaller but very athletic corner. You may have that hybrid safety linebacker or a traditional in the box strong safety like a Terrell Edmonds or like a Patrick Queen. Those two guys have a lot more in common than they do with other people that play their positions. Like certainly Patrick Queen is a lot closer to Terrell Edmonds than he is to Elandon Roberts, and Terrell Edmonds is a lot closer to Patrick Queen than he is to Minkah Fitzpatrick, right? I mean, that's that. Like, so I just think you end up with all these little like sort of sub-positional roles, and it's a very specialized thing on defense now. Guys that can do multiple things are so valuable. That's why when you line up Minkah Fitzpatrick, he can do any of those, right? Is he a half-field safety? Is he a center field safety? Is he a box safety covering the tight end? Is he a slot corner? he can do all of those things. And that's what makes him special. And that's what makes him so difficult to game plan against, because just because he's out there, that doesn't give the opposing quarterback and the opposing offensive coordinator any information about what the Steelers' intentions are in that play, the way that a very specialized guy, like if Keanu Neal was on the field for the Steelers this year, okay, he's a box safety. That's the one thing he does. That's all he does. If Shannon Sullivan was on the field, he's a slot corner. That's the one thing he does, and that's all he does. Having guys like Minka, guys like Patrick Peterson, and a lot of those guys that I talked about that are first-round corner options, Arnold, DeJean, Wiggins, they profile to be that same kind of chess piece on defense that can do multiple different things, even if their primary role is playing slot corner.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one more that I wanted to get here too. This is somebody that religiously comments on the YouTube. So anytime I see a comment from them, I got to get to it. Steeler Wade Show. Shout out to Jake. Said probably too late, but any thoughts on Javon Foster's draftability and could compete for a right tackle spot? It's funny that Javon Foster got asked about here because this was yesterday. And then today there was a mock draft put out that actually had the Steelers taking him in the 3rd round.
Yeah, I'm not a huge fan. I think he's like a bad combination of like not very big and not very physical.
6'5", 319. Yeah.
He's like lanky, right? He honestly feels like more like a project left tackle than a right tackle to me. Like I would, but he's not very quick. I don't know.
He was a Senior Bowl guy, wasn't he? So
yeah. He's just a guy that I feel like has like some interesting traits, but not enough of them to make it fit. I didn't think he was great at the Senior Bowl. The guy in that range that I do like is Roger Rosengarten from Washington. Now I think like could be a really good tackle. I think he's the one guy that's sort of after the maybe like probably a day 3 guy that looks like he could be a starter at tackle. He's still like probably needs to get stronger. He's not the biggest offensive lineman I've ever seen, but I like his technique. I think there's something there. The other guys that are in that range, I guess Mac and Salvis from Pitt. Oh, here's another like, don't here. I'm gonna get the comments angry here. Here's tomorrow's the comments about like, enough with the Pitt players. Like like you were just essentially typing, here I am. This is my name. I am an idiot that knows nothing. That is essentially what your comment is. Like,
imagine if Pitt had like Marvin Harrison Jr. coming out this year.
It had like 10 Hall of Famers. Aaron Donald has been like the best defensive player in the NFL for the last 5 years. Just because the Steelers drafted a bad one doesn't mean there's anything wrong with drafting Pitt players. Like, how dumb, how ignorant could you possibly be? Like, there is no college out there that you should not draft a player from. There's no college out there that can't produce a player at any position. Like it's the helmet is completely irrelevant to scouting a player. It does not matter. If they're good, they're good. It doesn't matter where they went to college. I mean, you may have more information about guys from certain colleges. You may have better access to guys from certain colleges. Like, I'm sure the Steelers don't know as much about a guy from Virginia State as they do Pitt, right? They just have had less exposure to them. But man, like it's really dumb. It drives me nuts. Mac and Salvis from Pitt is a guy that probably would have been like a 2nd or 3rd round pick, had I think it was a toe injury, missed almost all of his senior season. So he's coming out, and he's a guy that I think is interesting. He has some position versatility. He started at guard before he moved to tackle at Pitt because he was blocked by some veteran guys, Carter Warren, who's now with the New York Jets. And I think he's probably like a little bit better than his draft stock indicates. But there's a bunch of those guys in that group, like Foster and Christian Jones from Texas and Blake Fisher, that I've just seen a whole lot of. They've played a bunch of college football, and they feel very Dan Moore to me, where it's just like, this is kind of what you're getting. Like it's not going to be great.
Yeah, I was just saying, Blake Fisher's a guy, like, if you absolutely needed a tackle, like somewhat of a floor, absolutely nothing in terms of a ceiling that could play at the next level. Yeah. But like, what does he get you? Dan Moore, that's a good one to bring up.
Yeah, I feel like that those guys are just drafting Dan Moore again. And when you have Dan Moore at home, like, there's no reason for the Steelers to do that. Again, I don't. Somebody's going to draft Blake Fisher at the end of the 3rd round or the beginning of the 4th round. I just don't think it should be the Pittsburgh Steelers, who literally have Dan Moore on their roster. That's for someone who is in the Steelers situation at center, at tackle, where they just have no one.
Well, I was going to say maybe like a
got to play somebody. Let's draft Blake Fisher because we didn't get anybody in the first few rounds.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe like a Jets, because they're counting on, Tyron Smith not getting hurt at 36 years old with all his injuries, and Morgan Moses. Yeah,
you've got older injured guys. You're just drafting a backup at that point. That's fine. And there's
like a safeguard
in backup tackle. But yeah, I think Mack and Salvis from that group, and Roger Rosengarten especially. I really like him.
Yeah, I like Roger Rosengarten.
I think those are the guys that I would look to. And then there's some like way down the list guys. Travis Glover, the tackle from Georgia State, the Steelers have shown interest in. I really enjoyed talking to Ethan Driscoll from Marshall at the Combine. I think he could be an interesting guy. Caden Wallace from Penn State. These are like 6th round guys. You're just taking a flyer on them, but I think they're, they have a Julian Pearl from Illinois. Also, he's like had an interesting backstory. He's like Canadian. He played at junior college first. So like not sort of the traditional path. Those guys, you're always kind of like, oh, maybe there's something more there that just Illinois wasn't able to unlock, you know what I mean? And so I think there's guys there, but yeah, I think tackle is one of these things where when you have Dan Moore already, and the point of tackle is like upgrade plus future starter, it's kind of early or not at all. Like there's not a lot of reason to just draft a guy if you don't get one that you think is better than Dan Moore.
Yeah, that's very fair. All right, Alan, great conversation today, as always. And like I said, you'll be at the owners' meetings next week, so expect a different setting. We won't see all the credentials in the background there, unless you want to take that setup with you and just have it in the background while we see like palm trees and stuff behind you as well. But
I'll try to get, or maybe I'll just like sit in the parking lot with all the Bentleys. That could be interesting too.
There we go. Other than the owners' meetings next week, Alan, tell the people they can find you.
A Saunders_PGH, PGH Steelers Now, SteelersNow.com. Broke down a lot of what we talked about yesterday and just put it in more detail in terms of re-ranking the Steelers' position needs and breaking down some options for them in terms of free agency and in the draft. So go check that out.
There we go. Like, subscribe, hit that notification bell here. Hit us in the comments with your thoughts. Let Alan get the heat for everything that he had to say about drafting Pitt players. More on the Naji Harris stuff, although I gave my opinion now on the Naji Harris stuff, so I'm expecting some flack for that one as well, so you can divvy up the hate. And then we will see you guys after the weekend, of course. Leave us a 5-star review if you're listening somewhere else, Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. I'm Zachary Smith, PGH, for Alan Saunders and myself. Thanks for jumping in. Take another ride with us on the Steelers Afternoon Drive.